You never expect to catch your HOA president breaking into your garage at 2 a.m., especially not on camera, and especially not while the police are watching the whole thing live. But that's exactly what happened to me last month, and it changed everything I thought I knew about my quiet suburban neighborhood. If you think HOA drama is just about lawn heights and mailbox colors, you haven't met Mrs. Caldwell. She's the kind of person who smiles at you in the morning, then files a complaint about your recycling bins before lunch. But this time, she went way too far. It started with a letter. Not the usual friendly reminder about my grass being half an inch too long, but a formal violation notice for unauthorized storage in my garage. The thing is, my garage door is always closed. No one can see inside unless they're snooping. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe she'd seen me unloading boxes after a Costco run. But then 2 days later, I found muddy footprints by my side door, the one that leads straight into the garage from the backyard. That's when I got suspicious. I decided to check my security cameras. I'd installed them a year ago after a string of car break-ins in the neighborhood, but honestly, I'd never caught anything more exciting than a raccoon raiding my trash cans. This time, though, the footage made my stomach drop. At 1:47 a.m., a figure in a dark hoodie crept along the fence line, paused at my side gate and slipped inside. The person moved with purpose like they'd done this before. When they reached the garage door, they pulled out a set of keys, my keys or at least a copy. I watched frozen as the figure unlocked the door, stepped inside and disappeared from view for almost 10 minutes. The next morning I found nothing missing, but a few things were out of place. A box of old tools had been moved and my bike was leaning against the wrong wall. It was subtle, but enough to make me uneasy. I showed the footage to my wife and her face went pale. "That's not a random thief," she whispered. "That's someone who knows us." She was right. The way the person moved, the confidence, they weren't afraid of being caught. They knew exactly where the cameras were, too, because they kept their face hidden the whole time. I started thinking about who could have a copy of my keys. Only a few people had ever been inside my garage. My family, my old neighbor who moved away last year, and weirdly enough, Mrs. Caldwell herself. She'd come by a few months ago, insisting on an inspection after a neighbor complained about the smell of paint. I'd let her in, not thinking much of it at the time. Now, I was starting to wonder if she'd made a copy of my key when I wasn't looking. I decided to set a trap. I upgraded my cameras to stream live to my phone, and more importantly, to the local police department's non-emergency line. I called Officer Ramirez, who'd helped us with a neighborhood watch meeting last year, and explained the situation. He agreed to keep an eye on the feed, just in case. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, the same figure returned, this time wearing a reflective vest, like they were trying to look official. But the cameras caught everything, and this time, the police were watching in real time. If you want to see how this wild story unfolds, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Drop your craziest HOA story in the comments. I read every single one, and I might feature yours in a future video. Now, let's get into what happened when the police decided to make their move. The night the police watched my cameras live, I barely slept. I lay in bed, phone on my chest, every notification making my heart jump. At 1:39 a.m., the motion alert pinged. I opened the app and there she was, Mrs. Caldwell, unmistakable even in the grainy night vision. Her silver hair tucked under a baseball cap, reflective vest zipped up like she was on some official mission. She moved with the same confidence as before, but this time, she paused at the side gate, glancing over her shoulder. I could almost feel her nerves through the screen. She fumbled with a set of keys, found the right one, and let herself in. The camera above the garage door caught her face for a split second, There was no mistaking it now. I texted Officer Ramirez, "She's here." He replied instantly, "We're watching, stay inside." My wife was awake beside me, clutching my arm, eyes wide. We watched as Mrs. Caldwell slipped into the garage, flashlight in hand, scanning the shelves and workbench. She didn't take anything. Instead, she started snapping photos with her phone, focusing on a stack of boxes I'd been meaning to donate, and a few cans of paint left over from last summer's project. She was building a case, trying to collect evidence for her violation notices. But the real evidence was being recorded from every angle. After a few minutes, she moved to the far corner where my old bike and some camping gear were stored. She opened a box, rifled through it, then set it back down. I felt a surge of anger. This was my private space, and she was treating it like her own. My wife whispered, "Should we call 911?" I shook my head. Ramirez said to wait. "They're watching." The tension was unbearable. I wanted to run outside, confront her, shout at her to get out, but I knew that would only make things worse. The police needed to catch her in the act. Suddenly, Mrs. Caldwell froze. The garage door rattled, probably just the wind, but she panicked, dropping her phone. She scrambled to pick it up, then hurried back toward the side door. As she stepped outside, the camera above the gate caught her face again, this time in full color as the porch light flicked on. She looked straight at the lens, eyes wide, then bolted down the side path and disappeared into the night. I waited, heart pounding, for a message from Officer Ramirez. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "We have what we need. Stay put. We'll be in touch in the morning." Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with a strange sense of violation. My own HOA president had broken into my garage, twice, and now the police had it all on video. The next morning, I barely had time to pour a cup of coffee before there was a knock at the door. Two uniformed officers stood on my porch, Ramirez and his partner. "Can we come in?" he asked quietly. My wife and I led them to the living room where I pulled up the footage on the TV. Ramirez watched in silence, nodding as Mrs. Caldwell's face appeared on screen. "This is more than enough," he said. "We're going to need a statement, and we'll handle it from here." The officers took my statement that morning, asking every detail. When I first noticed things out of place, how long the cameras had been up, if anyone else had access to the garage. I told them everything, even about the time Mrs. Caldwell had insisted on inspecting my garage months ago. Ramirez took notes, his partner quietly nodding along, both of them looking more serious than I'd ever seen them at a neighborhood watch meeting. When I finished, Ramirez said, "We'll be contacting Mrs. Caldwell today. Don't talk to her, don't answer any questions from the HOA, and if anyone tries to intimidate you, call us immediately." I agreed, but inside I was nervous. Mrs. Caldwell wasn't the type to back down quietly. After the officers left, I sat at the kitchen table, replaying the footage over and over. Each time I noticed something new, a glance at the camera, the way she handled the boxes, the careful way she avoided touching anything she didn't need to. She was methodical, almost professional. My wife tried to reassure me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "What if the HOA tries to retaliate?" she asked. "What if they say we're making it up?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was wait. By noon, word had already started to spread. My neighbor, Mr. Patel, texted me, "Saw police at your place. Everything okay?" I hesitated, then replied, "Just some HOA drama. I'll explain later." I didn't want to start a rumor mill, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole street was buzzing. Sure enough, by late afternoon, I saw Mrs. Caldwell's car parked in front of her house, and two other HOA board members standing on her porch, talking in hushed voices. They glanced my way, then quickly looked away. The tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to cut with a knife. That evening, I got an email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Urgent, Violation hearing scheduled. The body of the email was cold and formal, informing me that I was required to attend a hearing in 3 days to address multiple violations related to unauthorized storage, improper use of security cameras, and creating a hostile environment. I almost laughed at the irony. Mrs. Caldwell had been caught on camera breaking into my garage, and now the HOA was accusing me of making the neighborhood unsafe. I forwarded the email to Officer Ramirez, who replied almost immediately, "Do not respond. We're handling it." Still, I couldn't help but feel anxious. The HOA had power in the neighborhood, power to fine, to harass, to make life miserable. I wondered how many other people had been bullied into silence by Mrs. Caldwell and her board. I started to realize this wasn't just about me. This was about standing up to a system that protected itself, no matter what. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mrs. Caldwell's face on the security footage, her eyes wide as she realized she'd been caught. I wondered what she was thinking now. Was she scared, angry, plotting her next move? I didn't know, but I was determined not to back down. I owed it to my family and maybe to my neighbors too. The next morning, I woke up to a neighborhood that felt different. There was a strange quiet, the kind that settles in before a storm. I could feel eyes on me as I walked out to get the mail, neighbors peeking through blinds, pretending to water their lawns, all of them wondering what was really going on. I tried to act normal, but my hands shook as I sorted through the envelopes. Another letter from the HOA, this one, a reminder about my upcoming violation hearing. I tossed it onto the growing pile on the kitchen counter, next to the original notice and the email I'd forwarded to Officer Ramirez. My phone buzzed. It was Mr. Patel again. "Heard anything new?" he asked. I hesitated, then decided to trust him. I told him about the break-in, the footage, the police. He listened quietly, then said, "You know, you're not the first person Mrs. Caldwell has targeted. Last year, she tried to fine me for having a flag on my porch. Said it was unapproved signage. I fought it, but she made my life hell for months." I felt a surge of anger. How many people had she bullied into silence? How many had just paid the fines to make her go away? Later that day, Officer Ramirez called. "We spoke to Mrs. Caldwell this morning," he said. "She denied everything, of course. Claimed she was conducting an official inspection and had your permission to enter the garage." I almost laughed. "Did you show her the footage?" I asked. Ramirez's voice was calm but firm. "We did. She changed her story, said she thought she saw smoke coming from your garage and was checking for a fire. But the timestamps don't match, and she never called the fire department. We're moving forward with charges for trespassing and unlawful entry. I need you to come down to the station tomorrow to sign your statement." I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The police were taking it seriously, but I knew Mrs. Caldwell wouldn't go down without a fight. That evening, as I was taking out the trash, I saw her standing at the end of her driveway, arms crossed, staring at my house. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no apology, no embarrassment, just cold calculation. She turned and walked back inside, slamming her door hard enough for me to hear it across the street. The next day at the police station, I signed my statement and handed over copies of all the footage. Officer Ramirez thanked me, assuring me that the case was solid. "We'll keep you updated," he said. "And if you get any more harassment from the HOA, let us know immediately." I nodded, but as I left the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse before they got better. When I got home, there was a new email from the HOA board. This one was different, colder, more aggressive. It accused me of spreading false information, harassing board members, and undermining community trust. They threatened additional fines and even hinted at legal action if I continued to defame Mrs. Caldwell, I forwarded the email to Ramirez, who replied, "Don't respond. Document everything." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of letters and emails, wondering how a simple violation notice had turned into a full-blown war. My wife squeezed my hand. "We're doing the right thing," she said softly. "You're not alone." I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed it. The neighborhood felt like enemy territory, and I had no idea who was on my side. The days leading up to the violation hearing felt like walking through a minefield. Every time I stepped outside, I could sense the tension in the air. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. A few, like Mr. Patel, offered quiet support, but most just kept their distance, as if siding with me might put a target on their own backs. My wife tried to keep things normal for the kids, but even they noticed the change. "Why is Mrs. Caldwell so mad at us?" my daughter asked one night at dinner. I didn't know how to answer without making her more afraid. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my head: the break-ins, the emails, the way Mrs. Caldwell had looked at me across the street. I wondered if she was losing sleep too, or if she was just planning her next move. I checked my cameras twice before going to bed, making sure every angle was covered, every alert set. I even backed up the footage to a cloud drive, just in case. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best shirt and tried to look calm, but my hands were shaking as I gathered my notes and copies of the police report. My wife squeezed my shoulder. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just tell the truth." I nodded, but my stomach was in knots. As we walked to the community center, I could see a small crowd gathering outside. Neighbors, board members, even a few people I didn't recognize. The room was set up like a courtroom, with the HOA board at a long table in front, Mrs. Caldwell seated in the center, flanked by two other board members who looked just as stern. I took my seat, feeling every eye in the room on me. The board president, Mr. Green, called the meeting to order. His voice was stiff, formal, as he read out the list of alleged violations: unauthorized storage, improper use of surveillance equipment, creating a hostile environment. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but I kept my face neutral. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, hands trembling just a little, and told my side of the story. I explained the break-ins, the muddy footprints, the security footage, and how I'd involved the police. I handed over copies of the police report and offered to show the footage to anyone who wanted to see it. Mrs. Caldwell interrupted, her voice sharp. "He's making this up. I was conducting an official inspection. He's trying to intimidate the board." I could see a few board members shifting uncomfortably, but most just stared at their notes. I looked around the room, searching for any sign of support. Mr. Patel caught my eye and gave a small nod. It was enough to keep me going. The board president cleared his throat. "We'll review the evidence and make a decision," he said, but I could tell from his tone that their minds were already made up. As the meeting ended, Mrs. Caldwell shot me a look that was pure venom. I left the room feeling more isolated than ever. That night, I got another email from the HOA, this one informing me that I'd been fined $500 for hostile conduct, and that further violations could result in legal action or even a lien on my property. I forwarded everything to Officer Ramirez, who replied, "Hang in there. We're moving forward with the case. Don't let them scare you." The days after the hearing felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every time I checked my email, there was something new from the HOA: warnings, fines, threats of further action. It was as if they were trying to bury me in paperwork, hoping I'd just give up and pay. But I refused to back down. I kept forwarding everything to Officer Ramirez, who reassured me that the investigation was moving forward, even if it felt painfully slow. My wife tried to keep our spirits up, but I could see the stress wearing on her. She jumped at every knock on the door, and the kids started asking why we couldn't have friends over anymore. One afternoon, as I was mowing the lawn, Mrs. Caldwell walked by on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand. She didn't say a word, but she stopped in front of my house, scribbled something down, and glared at me like I was a criminal. I stared back, refusing to look away. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me, not after everything she'd done. But inside, I was rattled. How much power did she really have? Could she actually put a lien on my house, or was it just another scare tactic? That evening, I got a call from Mr. Patel. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "A few of us have been talking. We're tired of the way the HOA runs things. If you need witnesses or just someone to back you up, let us know." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't as isolated as I thought. Maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood was starting to see through Mrs. Caldwell's act. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. The language was harsh. Accusations of defamation, threats of a lawsuit, demands that I cease and desist from spreading false information about Mrs. Caldwell and the board. I read it twice, my hands shaking with anger. They were trying to silence me, to make me afraid to speak out. I called Officer Ramirez, who told me not to respond and to keep documenting everything. "They're trying to intimidate you," he said, "but the law is on your side. We're almost ready to move forward." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my wife, sorting through the mountain of letters, emails, and legal threats. "What if they really sue us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took her hand. "Then we fight. We have the truth and we have the evidence. They can't scare us into silence." But even as I said it, I wondered if I was just trying to convince myself. The next morning, something changed. I woke up to find a note slipped under my door. It was unsigned, written in shaky handwriting. "You're not the only one. She's done this to others. Don't give up." I looked out the window, but the street was empty. I had no idea who had left the note, but it gave me a surge of determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone Mrs. Caldwell had bullied. The note under my door changed everything. For the first time, I realized Mrs. Caldwell's reign of intimidation wasn't just my problem. It was a pattern, and I wasn't the only victim. That day, I decided to take a risk. I printed out a simple flyer. "Have you had issues with the HOA? You're not alone. Let's talk." I left my phone number at the bottom and quietly slipped copies into a few mailboxes on my street, careful not to be seen by Mrs. Caldwell or her loyalists. I didn't know if anyone would respond, but I had to try. Within hours, my phone buzzed with a text from a neighbor I barely knew, Linda, who lived 3 houses down. "She fined me for my garden gnome," the message read. "Said it was unauthorized decoration. I paid just to make her stop." A few minutes later, another message. "She threatened to tow my car for parking in my own driveway. I have the letter if you want to see it." By evening, I had half a dozen stories, each one a little more outrageous than the last. It was like a dam had broken, and people were finally ready to talk. That night, I invited a few of the neighbors who'd reached out over for coffee. We sat around my kitchen table, sharing stories and comparing letters. The pattern was clear. Mrs. Caldwell targeted anyone who pushed back, anyone who didn't fit her vision of the perfect neighborhood. She used the HOA's rules as weapons, and most people just paid the fines or gave in to avoid trouble. But now, with the police involved and evidence piling up, the tide was starting to turn. Mr. Patel spoke up first. "We need to go public," he said. "If we all come forward together, they can't single any of us out." Linda nodded, her hands trembling as she clutched a stack of violation notices. "I'm tired of being afraid in my own home." We agreed to write a joint letter to the HOA board, outlining our experiences and demanding an independent review of Mrs. Caldwell's actions. We also decided to contact the local news. If the board wouldn't listen, maybe the community would. The next morning, I sent the letter to the board and copied Officer Ramirez. Within hours, I got a reply, not from Mrs. Caldwell, but from another board member, Mr. Green. His tone was cautious, almost apologetic. We take these concerns seriously and will be reviewing the matter at our next meeting. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign that the board was feeling the pressure. That afternoon, a news van pulled up outside my house. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, listened intently as we shared our stories. She filmed interviews with me, Mr. Patel and Linda, and promised to follow up with the HOA for their side. As the camera rolled, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. There was no going back now. Our fight was out in the open. That evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, I watched the news segment air on local TV. My face was on the screen, telling the story of a community pushed too far by an out-of-control HOA president. The phone started ringing. Friends, neighbors, even strangers from other neighborhoods, all sharing their own stories and offering support. The morning after the news story aired, the neighborhood felt electric. People who'd never spoken to me before waved as I walked the dog. A few even stopped to say, "Good for you," or "It's about time someone stood up to her." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe, but I also knew Mrs. Caldwell wouldn't let this go without a fight. Sure enough, by noon, the HOA sent out a mass email to every homeowner. The subject line was "Community Unity in Challenging Times." The message was classic Mrs. Caldwell, full of vague references to recent misinformation, outside agitators, and a reminder that the HOA's rules were in place for everyone's safety and property values. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The email ended with a warning: spreading falsehoods or encouraging division will not be tolerated and may result in further action. I read it twice, then laughed. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more obvious her desperation became. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. "Did you see that email? She's scared. Don't let her bully you." Even Mr. Green, the board member who'd replied to our letter, sent a private message: "Hang in there. Some of us are on your side." That afternoon, Officer Ramirez called. "Just wanted to let you know the DA is reviewing the case. With the footage and the statements from your neighbors, it's looking strong. Don't be surprised if you see some official movement soon." I thanked him, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, it felt like justice might actually be possible. But Mrs. Caldwell wasn't done. That evening, as I was putting out the trash, I noticed a car idling at the end of my driveway. The window rolled down and a man I didn't recognize leaned out. "You should drop this," he said quietly. "It's not worth the trouble." Before I could respond, he drove off, tires crunching on the gravel. My heart pounded. Was this a threat? Was Mrs. Caldwell sending people to intimidate me now? I called Ramirez, who told me to document everything and keep my cameras rolling. "If anything else happens, call us right away," he said. My wife was shaken, but I tried to reassure her. "They're just trying to scare us. It means we're getting to them." Still, I double-checked every lock that night and made sure the cameras were recording from every angle. The next day, the local news ran a follow-up story. This time, they included interviews with other neighbors who'd come forward, and even a brief statement from the DA's office confirming an active investigation. The tide was turning. More people started speaking up, sharing their own stories of harassment and intimidation. The board called an emergency meeting, and for the first time, Mrs. Caldwell wasn't in control. She looked rattled, her usual confidence replaced by a tight, forced smile. As the meeting ended, Mr. Green approached me quietly. "We're going to vote on her removal," he whispered. "It's time." I nodded, barely able to believe it. After all the stress, the threats, the sleepless nights, maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this. The night before the emergency board meeting, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities. What if the board backed down at the last minute? Or what if Mrs. Caldwell managed to sway them with more of her threats and manipulation? I kept replaying the footage in my head, the emails, the whispered encouragement from neighbors. My wife tried to reassure me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "No matter what happens tomorrow," she said, "you did the right thing." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The next evening, the community center was packed. I'd never seen so many people at an HOA meeting before. Neighbors filled every seat, some standing along the walls, others peering in through the open doors. The air buzzed with tension and anticipation. Mrs. Caldwell sat at the head of the table, her expression icy, flanked by the remaining board members. Mr. Green looked nervous but determined. As the meeting was called to order, he cleared his throat and announced, "Tonight, we will be addressing recent concerns regarding the conduct of the HOA president." Mrs. Caldwell tried to take control immediately, launching into a speech about protecting the community and combating misinformation. But this time, people weren't buying it. One by one, neighbors stood up and shared their stories about fines for garden gnomes, threats over parking, intimidation for minor infractions. Linda spoke about her garden, Mr. Patel about his flag, and others about the fear they'd felt in their own homes. The more people spoke, the more Mrs. Caldwell's composure slipped. She interrupted, denied, even tried to shout down a few speakers, but the room was no longer on her side. Then it was my turn. I stood up, heart pounding, and told my story from the beginning. The violation notice, the break-ins, the security footage, the police investigation. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but I didn't hold back. "This isn't just about me," I said. "It's about all of us. We deserve to feel safe in our own homes. We deserve a board that serves the community, not one that rules by fear." When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then slowly people started to clap. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. Mr. Green stood and addressed the board. "Given the evidence and the statements we've heard tonight, I move that we vote on the immediate removal of Mrs. Caldwell as HOA president." The other board members exchanged glances, then nodded. The vote was quick, 3 in favor, 1 against. Mrs. Caldwell sat frozen, her face pale, as Mr. Green announced, "The motion passes. Mrs. Caldwell, you are hereby removed from your position as president, effective immediately." A wave of relief swept through the room. Some people cheered, others hugged. Mrs. Caldwell stood abruptly, gathered her things, and left without a word. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt united. Mr. Green promised a full review of the HOA's practices and an open forum for residents to voice their concerns. As people filed out, neighbors I'd never spoken to before shook my hand, thanked me, and shared their own hopes for a better community. The days after Mrs. Caldwell's removal felt surreal. For the first time in months, I could walk outside without feeling like I was being watched or judged. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now waved, some even stopping to chat about their gardens or ask about my kids. The tension that had gripped our street seemed to melt away, replaced by a cautious optimism. But beneath the relief, I knew there was still work to do. The board had promised reforms, but trust had been broken, and it would take time to rebuild. Mr. Green called a special meeting for all residents, this time with an open agenda. No more secret votes or closed-door decisions. He started by apologizing for the board's failure to listen and for allowing Mrs. Caldwell's behavior to go unchecked for so long. "We're here to serve you," he said, "not to control you." The room was quieter than usual, but I could sense people were listening, maybe even hopeful. Neighbors began to share their ideas, real solutions, not just complaints. Linda suggested a community garden. Mr. Patel wanted a block party to bring everyone together, and someone else proposed a committee to review the HOA's rules and make sure they were fair and reasonable. For the first time, it felt like the HOA was actually about the community, not just enforcing rules. I volunteered to help with the Rule Review Committee, along with a few others who had spoken out during the crisis. We spent hours going through the bylaws, flagging anything that could be abused or used to target residents unfairly. It was tedious work, but it felt good to be part of something positive. We recommended changes, clearer language, limits on fines, and a requirement that any inspection or violation notice had to be accompanied by photographic evidence, and a chance for the homeowner to respond before any action was taken. Meanwhile, the police investigation into Mrs. Caldwell continued. Officer Ramirez kept me updated, letting me know that the DA was considering charges for trespassing and unlawful entry. A few weeks later, I got a call. Mrs. Caldwell had agreed to a plea deal. She would pay restitution to the HOA for legal costs and was barred from serving on any board in the county for 5 years. It wasn't jail time, but it was accountability, and it sent a message that no one was above the law. The news story faded, but the impact lingered. More neighbors started coming to meetings, and the board meetings became less about punishment and more about improvement. The community garden took shape, and the block party was a hit. Kids running around, adults laughing, people actually enjoying each other's company. For the first time, I felt proud of where I lived. One evening, as I was locking up my garage, Mr. Patel stopped by. "You know," he said, "if you hadn't stood up, none of this would have changed." I shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. "I just wanted to feel safe in my own home," he smiled. "Now we all do." As the weeks passed, the neighborhood slowly found its rhythm again. The fear and suspicion that had once hung over our street like a storm cloud began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. The new board, led by Mr. Green, kept their promise of transparency. Every meeting was open, every decision explained, and every resident given a chance to speak. It was a small change, but it made a world of difference. People who had never attended a meeting before now showed up, sometimes just to listen, sometimes to share ideas. The community garden project moved forward, and the first shoots of green poked through the soil, a quiet symbol of new beginnings. I found myself talking to neighbors I'd barely known before. Linda invited my family over for coffee, and we laughed about her infamous garden gnome. Mr. Patel and I started jogging together in the mornings, swapping stories about our kids and our jobs. Even the kids seemed lighter, playing outside with friends, no longer worried about the mean lady from the HOA. It was as if the whole neighborhood had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. But healing wasn't instant. There were still moments of tension, old wounds that took time to close. Some residents were wary, afraid that things might go back to the way they were. Others were angry that it had taken so long for anyone to stand up. At one meeting, a woman named Mrs. Evans spoke up, her voice trembling. "I paid hundreds in fines over the years. I wish I'd known I wasn't alone." Her words hung in the air, a reminder of how much damage had been done in silence. The Rule Review Committee worked late into the evenings, determined to make sure no one could ever abuse the system again. We debated everything: how many warnings before a fine, what counted as a real violation, how to handle disputes fairly. It wasn't always easy. People had strong opinions, and sometimes old frustrations bubbled up. But for the first time, those arguments felt productive, like we were building something together instead of fighting against each other. One night after a particularly long meeting, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the rooftops. My wife joined me, handing me a mug of tea. "You did good," she said quietly. I know it wasn't easy, but you changed things." I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of the past months finally start to lift. "We all did," I replied. "It took everyone." The next day, I got a letter in the mail, not from the HOA, but from a neighbor I'd never met. Inside was a simple note: "Thank you for standing up. You gave us all courage." I smiled, tucking the letter into a drawer with the others I'd received. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. As the community garden bloomed and the block party date drew closer, I realized that the real victory wasn't just removing Mrs. Caldwell or changing the rules. It was the way people had come together, the way fear had been replaced by connection. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was finally a place I was proud to call home. The day of the block party arrived with perfect weather, blue skies, a gentle breeze, and the kind of warmth that makes you want to stay outside all day. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt alive. Tables lined the street, covered in homemade dishes and desserts. Kids raced up and down the sidewalk, faces painted, laughter echoing between the houses. Someone set up a speaker, and music drifted through the air, mixing with the sound of old friends catching up and new friendships forming. I walked around, shaking hands, sharing stories, and accepting more than a few thank yous from neighbors who, months ago, barely made eye contact. Linda's garden gnome had a place of honor at the entrance to the community garden, a quiet symbol of how far we'd come. Mr. Patel manned the grill, flipping burgers and telling jokes, his easy laughter contagious. Even Mrs. Evans, who had once been so wary, brought a tray of cookies and sat with a group of neighbors, smiling for the first time in ages. As the sun began to set, Mr. Green gathered everyone together for a few words. He thanked the community for their patience, their courage, and their willingness to come together after such a difficult time. "We're not just neighbors," he said, "we're a community. And that means looking out for each other, even when things get tough." There was a round of applause, and for a moment I felt a swell of pride, not just for myself, but for everyone who had stood up, spoken out, and refused to let fear win. Later, as the party wound down and people started heading home, I found myself standing by the community garden, watching the last rays of sunlight glint off the gnome's painted hat. My wife joined me, slipping her arm around my waist. "You know," she said, "I think this is what your dad always hoped for when he moved us here." "A real neighborhood," I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "It took a lot to get here," I said, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything." That night, as I locked up the garage, the same garage where this whole story began, I paused for a moment, looking at the security camera above the door. It was still there, a silent witness to everything that had happened. But now, instead of fear, I felt gratitude. The camera had caught the truth, but it was the people who made the difference. Before heading inside, I took one last look at the street. Porch lights glowed, laughter drifted from open windows, and for the first time I felt completely at peace. The nightmare was over, but the lessons would last. I'd learned that standing up isn't easy, that change takes time, and that real strength comes from community, not control. If you made it this far, thank you for being part of this journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more real stories about standing up for what's right. And please share your own experiences in the comments. I read every single one, and you never know who you might inspire. Remember, no matter how tough things get, you're never alone. Sometimes all it takes is one person to start a movement and a neighborhood to finish it. Thank you for watching.